estimate in my lifetime that I've read upwards of 80 classic novels. So what makes a novel a classic? For me, these are the books that have just stood the test of time, that generations after they're written, that people find something of value to them, whether it's a theme that still resonates for the next generation, or just simply a story that is still enjoyed generations later. So here are my 10 favorites. I would love at the end of this video, after you've seen my list, for you to put some of your favorites below. You don't need to do your top 10, but if you want to do your top 5 or 3 or even favorite classic novel, I would love to hear what it is. Now, I instituted one rule on this video just so I wouldn't talk about just a handful of authors. An author can only appear on this list once, so my apologies to Steinbeck, Dumas, and some of the others that might have been on here more than once. These are ranked, and we're going to start with number 10. Here are my 10 favorite classics. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Published in 1899, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is the story of Charlie Marlowe traveling on the Congo River in search of the enigmatic Kurtz. It is a discussion on the evils of imperialism with a high degree of symbolism. One remarkable fact about this book is that English was not Joseph Conrad's first language. Am I allowed to start this list with a book that I don't feel I've fully grasped yet? I have read this, I think, 3 times at this point, this short book novella, and I feel that each time I start to grasp a little bit more of the symbolism that Conrad is going for in this story. This is one of those books that I do enjoy and continue to enjoy, and it's perpetually on that reread list for me. As soon as I finish it, I put it right back at the bottom of that list to be read a few years later, and I look forward to my next reread of this one. The reception of this one was mixed when it first came out, but it has stood the test of time, and there's a lot in there, even if I am honest with myself that I don't fully grasp all of it at this point. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Published in 1945, Animal Farm by George Orwell is a work of political satire. The allegorical setting of a farm where barnyard animals set up a society is based on Russia's Bolshevik Revolution. A short work, I found the conclusion and final line quite chilling. It may be an unpopular opinion, but when I reread both Animal Farm and 1984 a year or two ago, I think that Animal Farm is the superior work. This story just really hit me. I am a fan of allegory, so that is part of it. I really enjoyed this allegory, and I loved how the animals represented different parts of society. And this is a book that it could just continue to build, and when it gets to that final chilling line, it's chilling indeed. It's another short read that I think is well worth your time, and it's a book that I think is Orwell's best. Number 8, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Published in 1960, Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird would go on to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1961. A book often assigned as required reading in American schools, this story of racism in the American South has a timeless quality about it, in spite of some of the vernacular contained within the prose. Although critics of this novel say the novel tends to sermonize the points that she's making, I felt that there was a great degree of nuance, especially in terms of the character. I did not see Atticus Finch as this godlike character as portrayed by Gregory Peck in the movie, but I felt that he was a bit more nuanced in his dealing with racism. For me, this story is all about Scout, his daughter, who's 6 years old at the beginning and 9 at the end of the book, in this coming-of-age tale as she starts to open her eyes and starts to see and understand the facets of racism around her in the American South. She's a character they often think about and wonder how the events in this book shaped her life. Number 7, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Published in installments between 1875 and 1877, Anna Karenina is considered one of the greatest novels in literature. The story of an illicit love affair between Anna and Count Vronsky contains much more depth in this exploration of humanity through the upper crust of society. Although this story seems ripped from a modern-day soap opera, the opening epigraph, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," shows that it is much more. I had just gotten into reading Russian literature and a friend recommended Anna Karenina, and I was intimidated by the bulk. But he said Tolstoy's a lot easier to read than a lot of the Russians, like the Dostoevsky that I was exploring at the time. And he said it reads like a soap opera. And he was absolutely right. In many ways, it does read like a soap opera, but there is so much depth here in the story. I also love just how structurally different this book is. Partway through the book, without giving away spoilers, something happens that is very unexpected, and it just adds to the depth of this book. A lot of people consider this one of the finest novels ever written, and I would agree. Anna Karenina is a masterpiece. Number 6, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Published in France in 1862, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo is the story of Jean Valjean, a man imprisoned for 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread. The journey of this character is one of the finest in literature as we witness his miseries and his fortunes. It's a vast exploration of all sides of French society and has been an extremely popular work for over a century and a half. Reading Les Miserables takes you on just this grand spiritual journey. Some of the characters are just so vividly portrayed. You see, I have 2 copies of the book here. When I read translated fiction, when I love a work, I often want to reread it with a different translation. So I read this translation the first time. I'll be reading the second one here the next time that I do read this book, because I do plan to reread this book. This is a masterful work that's very sprawling. I do admit a lot of my enjoyment probably stems from the fact that I do love the musical, but as a work of literature, there's a reason that it's been one of the best-selling books for decades. Number 5, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Published in 1859 in both serial and book form, A Tale of Two Cities is likely Charles Dickens' most famous work. This sprawling political drama encompasses stories in both London and Paris and has some of Dickens' most memorable and quotable lines. And woe, that ending. Objectively, I could say that I don't think Charles Dickens' best work is A Tale of Two Cities. It just happens to be my favorite. Of course, the ending. I am a fan of great endings, and the ending of this one, in many ways, just elevated everything that happened before it in the text. The other thing that I really love about A Tale of Two Cities is that the stakes felt higher. There's just an added heft to this book that isn't present, at least on this level, as his other books. The stakes are often high in Dickens novels, but they're usually on the individual level rather than the societal level, like in A Tale of Two Cities. And it starts and ends with some of the most quotable material that Dickens ever wrote. Number 4, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Published in 1847, Jane Eyre, an autobiography, is the autobiography of a fictional character that portrayed a realistic picture of the social struggles of a woman of this time. One of the most noteworthy Victorian novels of all time, the story is brought to life through Bronte's masterful prose style. I'm not a huge fan of Victorian novels, nor am I a huge fan of romance, which is at the heart of this novel. But what I am a fan of is Charlotte Bronte as a writer. If you had to ask me of the hundreds of authors that I've read in my lifetime to pick the one that I think is the best, I think it's Charlotte Bronte. I feel that she has such a command of the language that exceeds everybody else that I've read. It almost feels when you're reading Jane Eyre that she took a considerable amount of time to craft every single sentence to make sure every single word was perfect. So even if the story about a Victorian woman is not to your liking, the writing will supersede that, and it may become a favorite of yours as it is mine. Number 3, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Published in 1866, Crime and Punishment is one of the finest psychological dramas ever written. The story of Raskolnikov, driven to commit a heinous crime partially due to his poverty, portrays the theme of guilt greater than anything you will likely read. This is a book that feels far more modern than a book written over 150 years ago. Indeed, this feels modern. The tension is just palpable throughout as you really get into the psyche of this main character. You see that I have 3 copies behind me. Crime and Punishment is a book that I plan on rereading for the rest of my life. I feel that there's so much depth here and there's so much more that I want to explore with this book. And as I mentioned with some of the other translated fiction on this list, I like to explore different translators. So I do have 3 copies already, and I'm sure if I made this video 20 years from now, I may have 8 or 9 copies at that point. But Crime and Punishment feels modern. It is as good a thriller as you're going to read, and just seeing this character go through this guilt is one of the best things I've ever read in my lifetime. Number 2, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Published serially from 1844 to 1846, The Count of Monte Cristo is the ultimate revenge tale. But it's more than just a revenge tale, as it is a deep exploration of corruption and social class, told in a manner that will often keep you guessing. Although the story unfolds slowly, it remains one of the finest plotted works of the 19th century. Count of Monte Cristo is one of the best plotted works of the 19th century. I find a lot of 19th century novelists do take tangents at times, even in some of my favorite books that I've talked about today. But I feel that this is one of the best plotted works of that century. Additionally, this is a great revenge tale. Even if you don't like revenge tales, which I certainly love, this is done so well, and in the third act, some things change, which for me elevates this text to one of the best works of the 19th century. Of all the works on this list, this is probably the easiest one for me to recommend to just about any reader. Number 1, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Published in 1952, East of Eden is considered by the author his magnum opus, although reception was not as strong. A retelling of the story of Cain and Abel from the Bible, Steinbeck set his story in the Salinas Valley of California and the interwoven stories of two families. It is a sprawling, epic-length novel with a great degree of thematic depth. Good and evil is the most obvious theme that you face in East of Eden. I loved the brother relationship here. I love the story of these two families in this very sprawling tale. And East of Eden has one of the finest villains in literature. A villain that I hate with every ounce of my body. Steinbeck has probably become my favorite author of all of these that I've talked about today, and is one of my favorite authors, period, whether it's classics or not. I do feel that his works are timeless, his works are universal, and I do love his prose. So my favorite author on this list is John Steinbeck. My favorite classic of all time is East of Eden. Well, I hope you enjoyed my list. Again, I would love to hear your list, even if it's a shorter one than your top 10 below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these books as well. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Goodreads, and the Fireside Discord. I'd love to interact with you there. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.